am Amanda at Fort Mill Psychotherapy, and I'm talking to you today about breath. What is it? Why is it important? Why is your therapist asking you to do it? All the nuts and bolts around it. So take just a second and just take one breath in, just a conscious breath. We do that so many times every single day, every day of our life, without really putting a whole lot of thought into it. And it's both an unconscious thing that our body keeps doing for us, and it can be a conscious thing that we have some ability to control and to shape. It's also something that through trauma gets really dysregulated. So that's probably the place we're going to start in this video, that with trauma, especially unprocessed trauma, our heart rate variability gets really out of whack. It becomes really erratic. So when I breathe in, that engages the sympathetic nervous system, which is kind of the get up and go. In really toxic amounts, it's kind of the fight or flight nervous system. And exhaling engages the parasympathetic nervous system. So the rest and digest, the calming, the cool and collected nervous system. Combined, they keep us going. We have to have a healthy balance of both. You can't just be completely parasympathetic dominant because you'll never get up and do anything. You can't be sympathetic dominant because you're going to be a nervous wreck probably. So the way that these two acts, the inhale and the exhale, come together creates something called heart rate variability. It shows just how coherent all of that is, how it gels. And whenever there's unprocessed trauma, that is really, really erratic. So the important thing to keep in mind when it comes to therapy is that our responses to attachment wounds are only interruptible whenever we're able to regulate our nervous system so that we can deal with them. So any kind of trauma, any kind of things from our past, our family of origin, anything that you're probably here in therapy dealing with, we have to be able to regulate the nervous system. We have to be able to regulate the breath. That's really, really hard. So if we can just lower the baseline and get some tools on board, get you practicing some of the breath techniques to start to bring all that down and under control and make it gel and make it calmer, it really supports everything that you do in therapy. Like, it will be so much more beneficial whenever you're also combining some of this other stuff with it. So the important thing to keep in mind about breath is that in the yoga world, breath and kind of the subtle energy that moves through your body, all that together, is called prana. And prana loosely translates to life force. So when you think about breath, consider that it has such a grand name. It's your life force. It is the thing that keeps you moving. It's the thing that can heal you. It's the thing that can support moving through some of the trauma that you're dealing with. And it's the thing that we always have with us. Even when you don't have a working phone to pull up an app to do something to get calm, even when you are on the road and you didn't think to take any of your stress balls or the tools that support you, even when the world is kind of crazy and there's a lot of noise and you don't really have a way to shut it out, we still have our breath. So take another breath. And just feel what that feels like in your body, to really notice your breath. Take one more. And you really start to tune in on a regular basis, intentionally noticing your breath, noticing what it's doing, noticing the quality, having kind of a sense of awe for it, the fact that it is your life force. Really starts to change some stuff in how you're seeing the world and how you're interacting with the world and what you're doing throughout your day. And that's all going to be really supportive of what you're doing in therapy. So a couple of other science-y type things that are really important to know is whenever we breathe, It's not really important whether we breathe in through our nose or in through our mouth or anything. We just have to know that there's some intention behind certain techniques. One of the thoughts, and I'm sure that I can pull together some studies on this, but can't think of anything off the top of my head, but one of the thoughts about breathing in through your mouth is that it actually elevates that sympathetic nervous system a little bit quicker, because you're actually taking in a lot more air than you should, really, because it's like, whereas if you were taking it in through your nose, it's a little bit less, it's a little bit slower, and there's some other stuff we'll talk about in a second. But when you do that, there's a lot of CO2 that gets kind of stuck in your body. And CO2 is the thing that creates the fight or flight response. Whenever there is a sharp uptick in CO2 levels in our body, the panic response comes online. So if I'm breathing in, what do you think is going to happen? I'm probably going to start to panic a little bit. And that's also what our breath kind of naturally does whenever it senses a threat. So it's kind of a chicken or the egg situation too, where, okay, something came at me and I was triggered in my head, and I took in a sharp uptake of breath because my brain was like, oh, threat. And then that cycle is already going and it's hard to get out of that loop. So one of the best things that you can do is focus on just breathing in through your nose. And maybe you breathe out through your mouth, depending on what you're trying to accomplish. Or maybe you consider breathing in through your nose and breathing out through your nose. If you notice, when I breathed out through my nose, it extended my exhale a little bit. Remember, the exhale is the thing that engages the parasympathetic nervous system. So if we can extend that exhale a little bit, if we can slow it down a little bit, that's probably a good thing, especially if you're dealing with anxiety. The other thing to know about breathing in and out through your nose is that we have paranasal sinuses that produce nitric oxide. And nitric oxide is antimicrobial. It is a vasodilator, so it increases like your lungs' ability to really get into full breath. Just lots of cool stuff happens there. There's probably a lot more that somebody could speak to, but these are the things that really get me excited, because it's like, wow, I can do all that just through breathing through my nose. Something to keep in mind too is whenever we have poor CO2 tolerance, which happens a lot, especially if you're kind of a shallow breather, or you're breathing in through your mouth, or you're not taking really deep breaths or slow breaths, or there's a lot of reasons behind that. But when we have poor CO2 tolerance, we're also more likely to have increased anxiety levels and maybe increased panic attacks. There's anything in that category is probably going to be increased and elevated. There's some really cool research out there, which if you're interested, let your therapist know and they can reach out and I can pass it on. But about how many breaths we are supposed to take in a minute to have optimal CO2 tolerance, to have optimal ability to regulate what's going on. So again, lowering that baseline so that we're not quite so activated so easily. We really should only be taking 3 breaths in a minute. Think about that. 3 breaths in a minute. So that would look like a 10-second inhale, a 10-second exhale, times 3. This is a really fun exercise. Some days I can get to 10. Other days, if I've been running around and kind of in my head, or doing some stuff, or some stuff's been triggered, I'm not going to get there. But it can be really fun to play with how close to 10 can you get. So that's where we're going to start as a tool for you to practice with today. So I want you to consider breathing in through your nose for 3 and out for 3. And then we're going to lengthen it, 1 and 1. So that would become 4, 4, 5, 5, 6, 6. 6, 7, 8 area is probably where you're gonna feel like I need to take another breath. Whenever you get there, just back it down. So let's start again at 3, and we'll try to go again. So I'll walk you through this. I'll consider that as you're watching this video, perhaps you only get to 6, and that is totally fine, and I'll back it down to show you where to go. So, begin. Now 4. Now 5. Now 6. And pretend I just had an urge to take a really big breath, so I'm going to back it down to 3. Now 4. Now 5. Now 6. And pretend I needed another deep breath. I'd go back to 3, and I would repeat that a couple times, with the goal of, maybe one day I'm really, really relaxed and I can work all the way up to 10. Beautiful. Still back it down and try it again. It's about how we can continue to kind of grow this over time and make it stick and make it work for you. So this is just one tool you can start with. The other important thing to really know about breath, and this is why some people are like, I'm not doing that, I've done it before, it didn't work, is we all have different stress. We're all different people. We all have different ways of relating to the world and handling things, and there's so many things that are going to dictate what is going to work for you. So playing around with different breath techniques is the starting place, just seeing what works and in what situation. I know that one I just gave you works for me in a lot of situations, but other times when I really can't, I don't have the space for that, I don't have the time for that, I'm gonna do something more like this. So this is called box breathing. And you're gonna imagine that you have a square. You're breathing in on 4, holding for 4, out on 4, holding for 4. So let's try it. Right there. Maybe that one worked for you. Maybe that's a good trick whenever you're out and about and you don't really have time to extend the breaths. Just get you back under control. Another thing to consider is a figure 8. You can kind of imagine in your mind less of counting and more of just something to kind of draw your attention into your breath. With everything, play around with it. There's a bazillion more things out there, and you'll learn it with your therapist if you want to. There's also some great apps, Headspace, Calm, Stop, Breathe and Think, Insight Timer, Shift State is a new one that I'm really, really loving. There's just so much out there when it comes to breath, and the important part is just to start, because until you start, you aren't really going to know what you're dealing with. A lot of us are kind of afraid of our own breath because with trauma, it's hard to live in our bodies. And that relationship with prana, with life force, is going to get skewed. It's going to get off. And so starting to develop a relationship with your breath, getting to know your breath, what does it feel like? What does it sound like? Where does it feel good to breathe? Where does it not feel good to breathe? Some people really push huge belly breaths. Others say that's not really physiologically appropriate, and it really stresses some people out. So maybe try breathing from here, or imagining all your diaphragms, because there's multiple places depending on what you're looking at there you're kind of breathing into. So just focus on any place. Like anything you're doing with intention is a place to start. So hopefully this was a good rundown of some of the basics related to breath. That is certainly not all, and there's lots out there, but this is a way to just kind of bring it down to what can you do right now to get started and why is it important. So hope this was helpful. Keep breathing. Thanks.